What's up YouTube? I'm the nice one, and today we are making an ogre type of character. Yeah, we're gonna be making an ogre in Maya. We're gonna do a lot of box modeling kind of techniques. Nothing too out of the ordinary that you've seen before, but we are making the base model from scratch again instead of using a previously made base model, because this character is not a lot, but a little bit different from other ones. So let's just jump straight into it, okay? Cool. Okay, jumping straight into it, let's start with a cube, and let's add some edge loops around the X and X-axis, and then start rounding out the cube to make more of a cylinder shape. And then let's scale down the top of the cube, and then, scale down the top of the cube, and then extrude down from the bottom of the faces, because we are going to make the head first. That's the starting mesh we're going to make, and then go from there. Now what I'm doing is basically what I'm trying to do is block out the general shape of the head that I want. So what you see me doing here is making the lips and the chin right there. I'm going to bring out the top of the forehead a little bit, move into smooth preview mode so I can see what the final product might look a bit more clearly. And then just doing some basic scale, just doing some basic edge transformations, just trying to get it to a point that I like, and then rounding off the bottom edges like that. And yeah, we're just doing the typical box modeling technique, and here I'm scaling out the chin, and then I'm going to extrude out the nose right there. Actually, I'm just going to select two faces in the front and then extrude out to create more of a nose, and then rotate it along the x-axis, along the z-axis, to make more of a bigger nose that has more of a protruding nostrils, so he looks a lot more angry. And then I'm just going to tweak it so that it's going to point down a little bit more. And now what you see me doing here is fixing up the cheeks a little bit, and also adding a little more detail to the nose. Just gonna at this point I'm just tweaking things, and just trying to get it to a point that I like. Maybe adding a little more detail around the bridge, and then adding a few edge loops at the top there to create the brow. Because I'm going to add some edge loops and then extrude out the brow like that, and then rotate it down so he looks a lot more angry. And then I'm going to bring in some of those edge loops right below the brow to represent where the eye sockets are going to be. And then I'm going to transform the edges that are protruding out below the eye sockets, because those will be the cheeks. And yeah, that's what you see me doing here. Again, I'm just kind of doing some basic tweaks, making sure my object X symmetry is turned on so that it's maintained on both ends. And then I'm going to try and scale out the back of the head a little bit more, and then rotate the back of the jaw so that it looks a bit more accurate. And yeah, so pretty much there I was trying to target weld a few edges, but it didn't quite work exactly, so I just let it be for now. And then I'm just going to fix up the bottom lip a little bit, because I wanted him to have an underbite, kind of like how the troll we've made in the past. I wanted to have a bit of an underbite, because this is more of a villain type character. Or at least, maybe not a villain, but I wanted him to look more intimidating. And so there we go. I'm adding a bit more detail along the bridge, making him look a little more, just adding more of a unique bridge compared to the troll character we had made before. And yeah, obviously I have to make him frown a little bit by bringing down some of the edges and the vertices there to give him more of an expression, a base expression. He's kind of got a resting bee face, if many of you know about that. And yeah. At this point, I was pretty happy with how the head was going. I'm pretty much just tweaking the head to get to a point that I'm happy with, if I'm going to be honest with you. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm actually going to fix a few more pieces right here. Maybe, actually, at the back of the head there was some jutting out polys. Like, it made it look like his head was lumpy, and that's not exactly what I wanted, so I had to fix that. But here now you see me doing is extruding out the neck. And so I wanted this character to be really big, like really kind of round, and almost like basically his shape was going to be like a teardrop. And so you see me extrude out the neck, and then extrude out the bottom of the neck to create the body, and then basically do some transforms to round it out and make that body look more of like a teardrop pear shape. That's basically what I'm going for this particular character. And now I'm going to scale in the bottom faces to make it look a little more, just to portion it out a little more appropriately. And then I'm going to try and give him more of a pot belly here, by fixing out where the belly protrudes out and where the chest sinks in. I'm also going to fix up the back of the shoulders there and where the neck is. And yeah, looks like we're in good shape right now. I'm going to add a few more edge loops, and then I'm going to select the edges along the x-axis to create the shoulders, pretty much the root of the shoulder, basically. And then basically rotate that in a way that it's ready to be extruded out to create the arms. But yeah, so the shoulders lead straight into his neck. Again, this guy is very much pear-shaped. Part of the inspiration was actually Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars. If any, I was going to ask if any of you actually seen Star Wars. I'd be surprised if you hadn't. But yeah, Jabba the Hutt was one of the reference art I was kind of looking at, and other typical like trolls you might have seen in Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. So that's where I was getting the general shape ideas from. But yeah, there you go. So you see me kind of tweaking some of the edges, and now what I'm going to do is extrude out the arms. I'm going to do that by just, again, extruding out, switching to the geometry mode, and then just fixing up some of the edges so that's a little more rounded and less of that weird weird octagon shape, and just kind of fixing it up so it's a little more tubular, a little more appropriate for how an arm should be and easier for me in the future. And then I'm going to extrude it out one more time to create the forearms, and then I'm going to extrude it out here to create the hands. Or, well, no, actually I'm going to rotate this around to create the hands, because I wanted the hands to be massive compared to the arms. Again, this character is very much not in proportion. And now in order to create the forearms, what I'm going to do is add a few edge loops, and then make sure my object X symmetry is on, and that way I can transform both sides of the arms appropriately, like both sides, like bring it in at the elbow, maybe bring it out at the bicep, and bring it out at the forearm, so it looks like he has a little bit of a musculature, and that the object X symmetry makes it happen on both ends at the same time. Now what I'm doing is trying to fix up the hand a little bit. Basically, actually what I'm trying to fix up is the palm. That's not actually his hand, because we're actually going to give this character fingers, which is actually new, which you haven't seen in some of my other character models. So I like to attribute that to a little bit of development from my point of view. Hopefully you are able to do the same thing. But yeah, so you see me fixing up some of the biceps, giving him a little more kind of a little weight around his arms. And yeah, okay, cool. So I'm fixing up the palm at this point, making sure that the forearm looks a little more. It was scaled way too much along the z-axis, so I had to bring that in a lot more. And then adding a few more edge loops to flatten out the palm a little bit more. And then here I'm going to extrude out the thumb. So I'm going to select 4 faces, extrude it out once, and then extrude it out a second time to represent the second joint of the thumb. And then just transform it a little bit here and there, maybe add some thickness and scaling it up just so that the thumb is a little more substantial. And once I was happy with the thumb, what I'm going to do now is actually add a few edge loops along the x-axis, and then select faces and alternating segments, so basically making sure to leave faces between each one I select, and extrude that out because that's going to make the fingers. So that's what you see me doing there. So I'll select 2 faces, skip 2 faces, select 2 faces, skip 2 faces, select 2 faces, and then extrude out, and that's pretty much how I made the fingers. Once I'm happy with the fingers here, I think what I end up doing is adding a few edge loops in the middle of the finger so that they at least have 2 joints, because they need to be able to curl in order to hold something. Otherwise, they're just paws, if I'm going to be honest with you. And yeah, he's got 3 fingers, this character. He's looking good so far. I'm just going to add a few more details in terms of his actual base shape, like his forearm and arms. And then the reason you see that other model, the base model we've been using before in the back there, is just for a sense of scale, to make sure that he looks appropriate to our other characters. He's scaled appropriately, and that when I bring them together, they won't look off or out of place. And now I'm just fixing up his belly a little bit, rounding it off, and then giving some more definition at his chest, fixing up the arms a little bit. You see me doing a lot of the tweaks by adjusting edges, because sometimes I find it harder to do that by adjusting the faces. And then now I'm gonna give him more of a bridge on his nose, make it a bit bigger, because I felt like his nose was a little too sharp. And so there we go. So I'm just going to add a bit of a bridge. Maybe it indicates that he's had a broken nose before, something like that. And yeah, or maybe it's kind of like a witch nose, if you know the stereotypical that type of a nose that has a bit of a bump there. Yeah, okay, cool. And so I'm just fixing up the forehead a little bit. I will be very transparent with you. I was having a bit of a hard time with a couple of vertices poking out here and there. So I tried to fix that manually. It didn't quite work out. So eventually I decided that I was just going to smooth it in sculpture mode later. Now what I'm going to do is select faces at the bottom of the mesh, bottom of the body. Torso, and making sure to leave a row of faces in between the ones I select, because these are going to be the legs, and you want to make sure you leave faces in between to represent the groin. And so that's what you see me doing here. I'm just making the top of the root of the thighs basically, and I'm going to extrude it down again, and then basically bring the edge loop of the knees forward so that his stance is a little more natural, and then probably add an edge loop at the bottom to bring out his feet, to bring out the feet. Yeah, I'm moving back to trying to fix up this head because it was bothering me a little bit. But yeah, eventually I decided to just smooth it out in sculpture mode later. I'm doing a couple of edge loops, vertex welds here to clean up the mesh a little bit so that there's not too many. Hopefully I can get rid of some intersecting polys or just redundant vertices and just clean it up that way. And yeah, hopefully it's helpful for me in the future. Fixing up the nose again to make sure it looks more like how a nose should be, with appropriate nostrils and pointing out as it should. And then I'm going to add a few more loops around the chin there. Actually, what I was thinking of when I was making him was Thanos. Thanos has a huge chin. He looks very intimidating that way. Now you see me doing is extruding at the feet right here. So I just select two faces at the front of the legs at the very bottom by adding an edge loop and then bringing it down closer to the bottom and then extruding that out to create the actual legs. Now you're going to see me skip here because I wasn't recording, unfortunately, but basically what I did was I took a cube, I flattened it to the center of his belly, and then kind of like what we would do with planes, I selected the faces on the x-axis and started extruding out and around the character's belly, because this is going to be kind of like a fur skirt that's going to go around him. So you see me doing that right here. Select the face, extrude out, and yeah, select the face and extrude out, and that's pretty much what I'm doing along the entire, but basically around the entire character until I'm pretty much happy. Yeah, and so there we go. Now we got a bit of a fur skirt that wraps around his belly a little bit, and then we're going to scale it in just so that it looks like it fits. It ends, like, at first it started looking like a towel, like he was wearing a towel, but that was sort of what I was trying to go for, right? Kind of like what we did with the troll in a previous video, how we made a skirt for that guy. I imagine that those two belong in a similar tribe or clan, and so that's why you see me doing that here. Yeah, now I'm going to just tweak the shape of the points of the skirt so that it doesn't look so too much like too flat, and it looks like it has a little more of a jagged edges around. And now what you see me doing is taking a plane, reducing subdivisions to 1, positioning it right in front of the belly, because I think what I'm going to end up making out of this plane is, if I'm watching this correctly, I'm going to make the front belt loop. And, oh no, actually what I'm going to do is make a, what do you call it? I'm going to make a belt that goes around, again, it's like a second layer belt that goes around the first skirt. And this one's actually going to be made out of leather or metal. And so that's what you see me doing here, taking a plane, extruding along the x-axis edges, and then just continues extruding around this model so that it wraps around his body a little more appropriately. Tweaking as I go to make sure things work out. And then I'm just going to keep doing that until the edges wrap around the body completely. And then once it's at the back, what I'm going to do is use the bridge tool in Maya to connect them and then close them off. And yeah, that's what you see me doing here. So there we go. Selecting bridge them together, add an edge loop straight down the middle to maintain symmetry, and then just using the scale tool to transform the belt a little bit more and fix it up a bit. Yeah, and there we go. Looking pretty good so far. Now what you see me doing is I'm going to take another plane and I'm going to bring the subdivisions down to 1, and I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis, add a few edge loops, position that right in front of the belly, and I believe this piece is actually what is going to create the belly, kind of the how do I say it? The belt buckle. Anyway, that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to make it into more of a cylinder shape and then extrude it out along the front and then select the edges along the perimeter or the faces along the perimeter to give it a bevel by doing extrusion and then pulling out on the handles. And then I'm going to extrude again along the side. It ended up making me think of like a wrestling belt. That's ended up what it made me think of a little bit. So it works in my opinion. I think that could be thematically appropriate for this character. Now I'm just tweaking out the belt a little bit to make sure it fits our hero a little bit. Maybe not our hero, but our villain a little bit. And then tweaking out the wrestling belt. So I'm going to duplicate the belt that we had made earlier and wrap it around the front of his chest, because I'm going to add pauldrons at his shoulders in the future. But here what you see me doing is tweaking in smooth preview mode, tweaking some of the faces so that it looks like it wraps around this troll's body, or this ogre's body, a little more appropriately. And yeah, so there we go. So scaling that down, maybe bring this forward, bring this back out. And yeah, once I'm happy with that, I think he's looking pretty good so far. I mean, not too bad at the moment. Now what I do is we're going to make a skeleton that will sit in the front of our wrestling belt. So to do that, take a cube, add a bunch of edge loops down the middle, down the center, vertically, and then extrude out the bottom faces so that we make a kind of cheekbones, like stylized cheekbones, and then select a few faces at the bottom to create the front teeth, or like yeah, basically the front teeth. Yeah, that's what you see me doing here. And then I'm going to rotate these around a little bit, maybe fix up the cheekbones a bit more. Basically, I'm trying to block out the shape of the skeleton that I want before adding detail. So you see me here fixing up the front teeth a little bit. And then now you see me adjusting some of the vertices there in order to create basically what I want to do is create a shape, a poly that looks like the shape of eyelids, so that I can extrude that out inside later in the future. And so that's what you see me doing here. I'm not going to extrude it yet, but I'm adjusting the vertices along the y-axis in order to do that in the future. Yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. I was thinking of Spawn, the character Spawn by Tom McFarlane, as I was making this. And now I'm actually going to do the same thing for the nose, once I'm happy with the eyelids right there. And then I added a bunch of edge loops right there, and you'll see why I did that in just a minute. But it was basically so that I can select every other edge loop and extrude that down and basically create teeth. Kind of like a little, yeah, basically create some teeth for our character here. It was looking a little odd, so I might have had to redo it a couple times just to get it to a point that I was happy with. Once I'm happy with this point, what I'm going to do is, again, fix up some of the eyes. Fix up the eyes a little bit more. Again, I'm really just kind of finessing this a little bit, but once I'm happy with it, I'm going to select the eyes' faces, and then I'm going to scale it up, and then I'm going to try and extrude in so that they look like actual eye sockets. So that's what you see me doing here. Control E, and then using the handle tool on the extrusion in order to extrude that in. And yeah, there we go. Now we got a cool skull kind of piece that will fit right in our wrestling belt. It gives it a nice little detail like that. I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah, moving on. The next piece what I'm going to build is actually going to be the shoulder pauldrons. So to do that, I'm going to make a cube, and this time actually I'm going to work off the x-axis as being my front. So I'm going to turn off symmetry, and basically I'm going to try and rough out a shape of a dinosaur skull, because I wanted to create kind of like a dragon skull as the shoulder piece. This one took a lot of, not work, but this one was a little more complicated because I had to make sure I rounded it, pointed at the tip, and then became thicker at the back, and then also had horns that kind of protruded out and circled around the front of the skull. And you'll see me doing that here. And I'm bringing up the edge there to round it off a little bit more, increasing the thickness, and then continuing to extrude back, because I believe this area is going to represent where the eyes are. And so that area is going to represent where the eyes are. And so I extruded back one more time, because from there, I'm going to extrude out the horns that are going to come out of that are going to come out of the head. But here you see me rotating a lot more to make kind of like a beak, kind of like a bird beak that you see. And I felt like that made sense because most dinosaurs are actually connected to, are closest, I believe the closest relatives are chickens, if I understand that correctly. Anyway, you see me kind of fixing up the skull a little bit. Again, pull up some reference art if you can as you're working through this. It comes in super handy, being able to just look at something and then kind of use that as a reference point for the models you're making in your kind of projects. And yeah, so now I'm just gonna try and scale out this skull a little bit to a point where I think it'll fit his shoulder a little more nicely. I'm gonna add a few more edge loops, and basically I think what I'm gonna try and do here is prepare to create a face that will represent where the eyes of this skull will be. Because kind of like what we did with the main skull, we're just gonna select the face and extrude in order to create the sense of an eye socket. Here what you see me doing now is just kind of fixing up how the top jaw will connect down into the bottom one. And then here I'm going to create the root of the horns. So I turned on object Y symmetry, I believe. And then I'm just going to extrude out and basically make kind of like ram horns that you've seen before. And yeah, I'm just going to extrude those out from the side of the helmet, from the side of the skull a little bit. Right, and I'm going to use the edge tool to not rotate, but scale it up so that it looks rounded. And then fix up how that actually connects to the skull by making it look like it's coming from the side of the skull as opposed to the top. Again, this was a lot of kind of messing around and seeing what works and seeing what felt right as I was going through it. So now I'm just positioning it at his shoulder so that it fits the model a bit more appropriately and it doesn't look like a massive skull that doesn't look like he could actually wear as armor. And yeah, I thought that was looking pretty good. I'm going to add a few more edge loops and maybe bevel a few edges to sharpen out the shape of this skull a little bit. But yeah, maybe even rotate some of the edges here and there to make it rounded. Again, I think I was looking at RAM concept art. Now what you see me doing is creating a cube, and then I'm going to add a few edge loops at the top and bottom, and then scale in the bottom edge loops, and then use the target weld feature and to target weld the vertices together to the middle vertex, and to make a pointed edge, because what I'm going to use this kind of triangle piece for is as fur that kind of goes around the skull as kind of like padding that you might expect somebody to have when they're wearing kind of like bone armor. So you see me doing that here. I'm just kind of rotating and tweaking it a little bit so that it looks more kind of like a fur piece, kind of like the hair you've seen me do with other characters before. Oh no, actually, that's my mistake. I end up using that spike piece as fangs, but I will use the same asset for the fur later. And yeah, there you go. See me doing that right here. So I'm using the fur asset as fangs, but I actually added it I was intended it to use as fur, but I ended up using it as fangs as well to kind of give the head a little more detail. But for the fur, what you see me doing now is basically just taking the asset, duplicating and moving it to the left and rotating it a little bit, and then duplicating it again so that it kind of goes around the skull a little more appropriately. And it looks like it's actually protruding out of the skull. And I remember at the time when I was making this, I was playing a little bit of Monster Hunter. And I know I'm late to the party on that one, but I remember I was thinking of the bone armor. So that's another piece of reference art that you could kind of look up as you're making this, or if you're making something similar. But yeah, okay, so here we go. So now what I'm going to do is start making the eye sockets. And so to do that, I'm just going to adjust a lot of the edge loops right here. And basically shape them into an eye socket that I want. And then select the faces and then extrude them in to create to indicate where the eye gap would actually be. And then fix up how the brow is and just do some tweaks to make sure the eye looks a little more appropriate. And here what you see me doing is by looking at reference art, you see that there's actually 2 holes on a dinosaur skull. And I assume that represented the nose, where the nose would be. And so I wanted to make sure I captured that as well, just for the sake of realism and so that people would buy it and it didn't look unnatural. And yeah, there we go. So I'm pretty happy with how the skull ended up looking like, this dragon skull piece. I was pretty happy with it, to be honest with you. I quite liked how it ended up looking in the end. And what I end up doing is, once I'm happy with the fur, I basically just combine them all by selecting each mesh and going mesh combined, and then just mirroring it on the opposite side so that it's there, so that it's perfectly symmetrical. But yeah, at this point, what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start creating the eyes. So to do that, I'm going to create a cube, create a sphere, and then I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to create a sphere, and I'm actually going to rotate it along the x-axis so that the top of the sphere is actually facing us. And then I'm going to duplicate the sphere, delete the bottom half, and then duplicate the sphere again and delete the top half in order to create eyelids. And then I'm going to apply some thickness to them, maybe about 0.05 thickness, depending on the size of your model. And there you go. Now I've got some eyelids, and I'm actually going to try and position them into the head a little bit more once I'm done with transforming them in a way that I think looks good. Yeah, and there you go. And hopefully in the future, when the riggers try to rig each eyelid, it's easier for them to transform and control how a character looks, how they blink, and stuff like that. So you see me doing that there, positioning the eyelid in the eye socket. I'm gonna have to fix up that eye socket a little bit more by bringing it in so that it can fit the eyelids a bit more accurately and appropriately, and that the brow doesn't interfere with how the eyelid looks. Yeah, that's just some quick edits as I'm going through. Here what I'm doing is selecting the front, a small circle in the front of the eye, and extruding in, because that's actually going to be the iris, or the pupil, sorry. That's going to be the pupil, where the light enters your eye. And there you go. I'm just going to select the mesh and duplicate them on the opposite side, mesh using space mesh mirror. Now I'm just duplicating the teeth on one end, because what I'm going to do after I've duplicated all the teeth is combine them and then just mesh mirror them onto the opposite side as well, so that there's symmetry for the whole row of teeth there. At this point, I'm just adding details, and I'm pretty much done. Like, I'm trying to add a lip here so that it's a little differentiated from his actual jaw. So that's what you see me doing here. That's why I extruded that out and then brought it in a little bit and kind of fixed it up a bit more so that it wasn't too crazy. And yeah, there we go. And yeah, we're pretty much done, to be honest with you. The rest of this kind of video is just me kind of going through tweaks. So yeah, let me know what you think. Hopefully you found it useful for you, and hopefully you're able to follow along. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see in terms of what I did here. And yeah, I'll talk to you. Maybe I'll see you in the next video, okay? Thanks for watching the video. If you like my content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let me know down below what you want to see next, or just check out some of these other great videos. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you later.